reporting live here from Chabad of Jackson. Actually, the meeting at 1:45, so that's why we're here.
No, not now.
So I can get to it. Okay. So today I think this is the last class on sacrifices. Like just literally going through the details of the sacrifices. We actually did Tuesday's class on Monday, so we're going to do the Monday class now. That's there worked out. And we're going to go through, you're going to learn about kosher today, actually. What vessels can be kosher or can't be kosher. It's actually interesting if you're koshering your kitchen. You're going to see why you can't kosher a porcelain sink for Pesach if you have a porcelain sink. Like you can't kosher your bathroom sink. That's probably made out of porcelain. So stay tuned and you'll see as we wrap up the sacrifices here, some of famous, interesting laws that we learned from the Chumash from this week's Parsha. Verse number 12. By chapter 6, verse 12, we're holding the third Chumash, in the Torah, and we're learning, the third Chumash starts off with Hashem telling Moshe all the different sacrifices. And just to recap, you remember there was 4 general categories of sacrifices, right? There was the burnt offering, the oila, which the whole animal and everything was burnt on the altar and outside was totally burnt. There was the 2 kinds of sin offering, depending on what sin you did. Remember, there was a sin that somebody violated, being cut off from Hashem, and then sometimes there were false witnesses. There were 2 kinds of sin offering. One was called a chatas, and one was called a asham. So those are the next 2 kinds, the sin offering and the guilt offering are the names of those offerings. Then there was a shlamim, which we learned about at length yesterday, which was the peace offering. The owners really only ate from the peace offering sacrifices. The sin offerings, the other offerings, the owners that brought it never got the steak, never got the meat. The meat either on the burnt offering no one got it, it was just burnt. But in the 2 sin offerings, when someone did a sin, the Kohanim would eat a lot of that meat. Some of it would be burnt on the altar, but the Kohanim will eat a lot of that meat. So there were 4 offerings. Just remember that. The burnt offering, sin offering, the guilt offering, and the peace offering. Those are the 4 offerings. We're going to get into some of those details in today's Chumash about those sacrifices. Okay. Verse 13. Zeh karban Aaron uvanav. This is the sacrifice of Aaron and his sons. Asher yikriv el Hashem. When do they bring the sacrifice? Interesting. On the day that they are anointed. When you anoint them. Now, just to explain, the truth is that if you don't need to be anointed to be a kohen. To be a kohen, you're automatically a kohen. If your father's a kohen, your son's a kohen. So when would you do this special inaugural, situation? You would do it on the day that you started serving as a kohen, okay? Because you weren't anointed. So who was anointed? Only the high priest was anointed, because it wasn't automatic that because your father was the high priest, you were the high priest. You had to specifically and deliberately be anointed, nominated and anointed in order to become the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. But to be a regular Kohen, it's just automatic. Like David Jarasho, automatically he would serve in the temple. But when David would go in to serve, this is what what he's going to do when David's going to start serving in the Beis Hamikdash. On the Kohen, this is what he's going to do. He'll bring Asiris ha'efa, soilus. He'll bring a 1/10 of an ephah. I believe he said it was 2.5 liters, like a soda bottle and a little bit more. A large soda bottle, soilus of fine flour. That's 2.5 liters of flour, mincha of a meal offering. So on the day of inauguration, when the Kohen would start serving in the Beis Hamikdash, when David Jarasha, or if Yehuda is on our class 2, I see our Kohanim, they're going to start serving in the Beis Hamikdash. They're going to have to go and bring fine flour. The truth is, Yehuda dropped off by my house a while ago a whole bag of fine flour from Russia. I don't know what's in that flour, Yehuda, if you're with us, but that fine flour is going to be given to the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, Tamid the Kohen Gadol is going to do it on a daily basis, meaning the high priest has got to every day bring the sacrifice. But let's say if David Jarasha becomes a high priest, then he'll have to do it every day in the morning and the afternoon. But if he's just going to end up being a regular Kohen, then he'll only bring it on the day of inauguration. That's the time that he's going to bring that meal offering. On the day of inauguration, he's going to bring that meal offering. Now, how is that meal offering made? Oh, this is a unique kind of a meal offering. What do they do with the flour? What are they making? Pretzels? You know, the big pretzels they sell in the street? Are they making flatbread? What exactly is the sacrifice that they're bringing in the Beis Hamikdash? What is inside the sacrifice that they're bringing in the Beis Hamikdash? Okay. So he says, al machvas, it should be on an oil shallow pan, so not a deep fryer like we learned in the other classes. It should be you should use a shallow, just like a regular fry pan, to make a nice fried dough. But this thing is actually very interesting. It's going to be cooked 3 times. Murbeches, you're going to first take the flour, throw it into boiling hot water, right? Some people say maybe it was oil, like you make the donuts, the Hanukkah donuts, or you could throw it into boiling. Some people say, it seems from Rashi, I think, that it's water. So you take the flour, you throw it into boiling water and make some kind of a thing. Then you take it out of there and you cook it a second time in an oven. Stick it now in the oven. Then after the oven, you deep fry it. So I don't know if anyone could think of in our class what kind of food that would taste like today when you cook it. Like, I don't know if anyone does like that. You know, I know when we have our cook-off barbecue competition, some people first will fry the steak and then they'll put the steak on the grill for a little bit, or do the opposite. Here, that's happening with the flour is that they're first boiling the flour, then they're going to bake the flour, and then they're going to fry the flour. That's what you need to do if you want to be a kohen. That's exactly what you need to do. And then minchas petitim takriv, you should then fold it over. You take this cooked, boiled, fried latke, whatever you want to call it over here, this flat doughy thing. You fold it over once, and then you fold it over a second time, and it's like a nice sandwich, you know, but it has like 4-layer sandwich because you folded it over twice. And you bring it as a burnt offering, as the meal offering to Hashem. You go and you bring that as your sacrifice to Hashem that you just made. Very interesting kind of inaugurative flour offering. The kohen would be in that David Jarsha will bring when he starts serving the Yisraelis. What about the anointed kohen, the kohen gadol? That guy who has to be anointed because he's not automatically a kohen. Tachtam mibanav yasa oisai chok oidam Hashem kolu takter. You should every single day. This was, I believe it was even maybe twice a day. In the morning and the afternoon, the kohen gadol wouldn't just do it at the inauguration. He did it every single day that he was serving in the Mishkan. He would bring this very unique kind of a pancake, whatever you want to call it, a fried, boiled, baked pancake that he would bring as a sacrifice in the Beis Hamikdash every single day. Now, another interesting thing, as I mentioned this before, when the Kohen would bring your sacrifice, he would eat it. But when the Kohen's bringing his own sacrifice, who's eating it? Nobody's eating it. It's going to be completely burnt on the Hashem, but by Hashem. So very often, if the Kohen was helping you out to fix yourself, then you would then he would he would eat it for you. You'd give a little bit on the altar, he would eat the rest. But if you're the Kohen bringing the sacrifice, you don't eat it. You burn it, as it says in verse number 16 over here. The Kohen sacrifice should be completely burned to Hashem. I need to have a third person I could see in our class. I only see 2 people, Gregory and Evan. I need a third person that I can look at when we learn. If you could, one more person could open the screen. Anyway, that is the end of the inaugurative flour that the Kohen Gadol would bring when he would be inaugurated. So that's another important part of the sacrifices that we learned. Now we're going to go back to the sin offering, and then we're going to learn about the details of the guilt offering. Even though we mentioned in the previous parsha, we're now going to get into more details. Hashem said to Moshe, saying, God says to Moses, speak to Aaron and his sons. These are the laws, more details about the sin offering that I'm commanding you to bring. So what did we say? When a Jew does any of the 365 sin offerings, that had he done it on purpose, he would get excursion, cut off from Hashem, right? The punishment would be, his soul would be cut off from Hashem. If he would be one of those 265, 300, one of those sins from the list, a very small list from the 365 commandments, he would have to bring a sin offering. But where should you slaughter it? That's the same place which when we first started our class, right in the beginning of this Chumash, we talked about the burnt offering. That was the first sacrifice that we spoke about that you burn every single day. He said that you always slaughter it in the north. I believe the peace offering, because remember I always told you there's 4 kinds of offerings. You could slaughter that whatever you want. But the burnt offering and the sin offering and the guilt offering, you always slaughter it in the north. We learned an interesting reason from one of the commentaries, is that corresponds to your left heart, which is where we believe the seat of the evil inclination is where you are. So this animal that you're bringing to represent forgiveness and so on, because you're doing it for a sin, the peace offering, you're not doing it for a sin. You can slaughter wherever you want, but this has to be done in the north. So you'd walk into the front door of the courtyard, you'd right away make a right, and right over there they had they had different stations. There was a station where they would slaughter the animals. So the sin offering has to be slaughtered in the north of the courtyard, right to your right when you walk into the courtyard. So the same place which we originally said in the north, you have to burn the sin offering, the burnt offering. That's where you slaughter the sin offering. Before God, it should be considered a holy of holies, which means that I also told you, you'd split all the sacrifices into two categories. It's either holy of holies or it's just holy. Remember the difference. If it's holy of holies, the law is that it has to be eaten. You have to eat the barbecue in the actual courtyard of the temple. And it has to only be eaten usually within 24 hours. If it's regular holy, you could have 48 hours about to eat it, and it can be eaten anywhere in Jerusalem. But this, a sin offering is the higher standards, higher restrictions, more restrictions. It's a holier sacrifice, and therefore it's holy of holies and has to be burnt in a certain place and eaten within a certain amount of time, and within the courtyard of the temples where it has to be eaten. What about the Kohen, who is the one doing the job, which means he's bringing the forgiveness? This guy's nominated to take care of your sacrifice. Him and his whole family that's now operating in the temple that's holy, they're not impure, they have the rights to your meat. Remember, I told you the sin offering, you don't get to eat it. A little bit, some of the pieces, a couple of pieces go on the innards and so on, the fats go on the altar, and the rest of the meat, they have a party. And remember, it has to be in the temple courtyard. They all enjoy, the Kohanim get their sustenance, and they enjoy eating the meat that you brought as a sin offering. They have to eat in a holy place. It's got to be in the courtyard. So all that meat is eaten by the Kohen and his friends and his family that are currently not, because if you're impure, you can't eat it, that are currently pure, that were pure at the time you brought the sacrifice. All of them get the benefit from the sacrifice and eat it in the courtyard. So they could all eat it. And now he says, verse 20, here we're going to get into maybe some laws of kosher. We're going to learn from here some of the laws of kosher. What happens if they brought with their steak, they wanted to maybe, I guess they're allowed to eat other stuff maybe, right? They have another hamburger there. Now this hamburger was from Dougie's. There's the kosher, I don't know if you guys know, the kosher Dougie's. He had another steak from Dougie's. He liked Dougie's steak. So besides the meat that he had from the sacrifice, he also had a restaurant, maybe some, what do you want with my food? I want to have something else. He put it on bread. Let's say he didn't like the bread that they had. He had other matzah or whatever. He had something else in the courtyard. And that meat touched that meat. What happens is anything that absorbs from the taste of that meat now has sacrifice taste meat in it. And now it becomes holy, the same thing as a sacrifice. So whatever absorbs that thing becomes now like that, and it has the same requirements. If that becomes impure, it's not impure. It's basically the same, whatever absorbs the flavor becomes the same status as the requirements of the sacrifice. It has to be eaten in the courtyard and so on. So anything that touches it and absorbs the yikdash becomes holy. And what happens? He says, interesting. The Kohen's going, and remember, he has to sprinkle the blood. So he goes to the two ends of the mizbeach of the altar, and he sprinkles blood. And what happens if his clothes get blood on it? So he says he can send it to the regular cleaners, right? I have a friend, Jason. Sometimes I send my cleaners to. Can't go to your local cleaners and send it there. You have to make sure to wash it in a holy place. This blood is holy. So if the clothing absorbs that blood, you cannot just now walk out with your bloody clothing like you would if you were in a butcher shop or a slaughterhouse, your clothes full of blood. You now would go to your washing machine and throw in the washing machine. No, there's a very big problem. If your meat touched that meat or food or anything else absorbed that thing, that's now holy like the sacrifice. And if your clothing have holy blood on it, you have clothing with holy blood, and you can't just wash it, and you can't just go stick it in your washing machine, put in a little bit of detergent, and wash it out. That doesn't work. It has to stay in a holy place. So you have to wash it inside the courtyards. I don't know how they would do it. They would have some kind of a system. Maybe they had another a different area where they would help take care of somebody's clothes, because that blood is not allowed to leave. You got to take it out. The rest of the clothes that didn't get blood, you can, but the part of the clothing that had blood on it now has to be treated in a very special, careful way, and now your clothes absorbed holiness. But here's where he goes. Now the guy's having his lunch, and he's eating. His wife sent him with some pots and pans to eat the food. Here's a very interesting story. Here's where it gets interesting, and we're going to learn basic laws of kosher. You're going to learn in your house. If you have, from here, we're going to see, you have your bathroom sink cannot be kosher. We're going to learn about it right now. But your metal sink could be kosher. And the idea, at least part of it, comes from this verse, which we're going to learn right now. So the guy had for lunch, he brought with him a bowl. He had a bowl made out of earthenware. Okay, like you have in your house, something's china or stuff like that, or fancier earthenware. The bowl's made out of earthenware. So his wife sent him with fancy china earthenware bowl to the temple to eat his barbecue that he's having after the sacrifice. So he takes out his lunch bag. He doesn't need to bring lunch with him, but he needs the utensils to eat, and he starts eating on an earthenware plate. He takes the sacrifice, eats the sacrifice on an earthenware plate. He made a big mistake. Why? Because in that earthenware plate, we'll get the taste from the meat. It's going to go inside the earthenware plate. Now, how long does the animal have to be eaten? Only 24 hours. Remember the sin offering, you only have up to that night to eat it. But guess what? The taste absorbed in the earthenware plate has now inside it sacrificial meat. Now it has to be, anything left over has to be burnt on the altar. So he says, look, if your wife sent you to work, I'm saying the guy could also, I'll just give you an example. If you brought from home a copper plate, we have a simple solution. You stick it in boiling hot water. The boiling hot water takes out the taste. You kosher it. Then that's the same way we kosher things today. If you have a metal sink, you take boiling hot water, you pour it over it, even if it had something totally not kosher in there, the boiling water takes out the taste. But for some reason, whatever the reason is, earthenware vessels retain their taste and will not give up the taste. So your meat that's inside the earthenware vessel has no solution. And by the way, my friends, that's exactly the same thing today. People, when I go to kosher people's houses, they're earthenware vessels. They're made out of stone, not host. It depends which kind exactly it works, but the earthenware vessels cannot be koshered because they never give up their taste. So this is what he says in verse 21. An earthenware vessel that you cooked. If you ate it cold, if you had like a cold non-kosher drink in a earthenware vessel, you're fine. It didn't absorb. But if it was hot, you boiled the meat, you had a barbecue, and you put boiling hot steak on an earthenware plate, your shaver needs to be broken because there's no way to get the taste out. And now the taste is going to go past the 24-hour period. And you could be cut off from heaven for eating meat past the 24-hour period. And that taste is in your earthenware vessel because you used hot steak on it. And now it's no good, everybody. If it's copper, like metal, bushla, you cooked it in a metal bowl, then no problem. You put it in boiling hot water and then you wash it out with cold water. And it's completely purged. But an earthenware vessel, we learn from here, is not allowed to be kosher. So here's some of the laws. We're learning it regarding sacrifices, right? About absorbing the taste, that the taste can't last there for more than 24 hours because you have to burn it within 24 hours. But we're also going to learn all other laws of kosher from the sacrifice situation that we're learning about over here. Verse 22. Any kohen who is a male kohen can eat the holy meat. Not just the guy who brought the sacrifice. Rashi is going to explain to us later on, there was a system. There was thousands of Kohanim. So how would you do it? So David Jarish's family would be serving that time in the temple. Everyone who was pure at the time when the guy brought the thing, is all his cousins and his brothers and the whole family, the Beis Av could eat together with him. They have the barbecue together in the courtyard of the temple, all male Kohanim. And all sin offerings that you could also get messed up in another way, he's going to tell you now. You could get messed up if you bring the animal outside the courtyard when it has to stay inside the courtyard. It's not a good sacrifice anymore if you bring it further out than where it's allowed to go. But you could also mess up the other way by bringing it in further in than where you're supposed to go. The blood of a sin offering and a guilt offering, like we learned, goes at the corners of the altar in the courtyard. But what happens when the kohen said, you know what? I want to bring this one inside the Mishkan, inside the tabernacle. I want to sprinkle on the blood of the altar inside the Mishkan. No. There's only one who could bring blood to sprinkle inside the Mishkan is only if you're a Kohen Gadol who sinned, or if you're a leader, or if you're a Sanhedrin who sinned. But the regular Jew, if you bring that blood inside the Mishkan, no, then also disqualifies it. It's only kosher if it's in the courtyard. All sin offerings, you sprinkle its blood, you bring its blood into the tabernacle, to get forgiveness for you, to get him into a holier place. You also, you can't eat that sacrifice anymore. That animal has to be burnt. It's a prohibited sacrifice because you messed up and you brought it into too holy. It's not allowed to be brought into too holy either. Okay, the Zayis Teiras Asham. And finally, we're going to conclude, I believe, with this. This is the laws, the details we haven't given you yet for the guilt offering, the other kind of the sin offering, the guilt one. Again, as just like in the Ola sacrifice, you slaughtered it to the north. You made a right as soon as you came into the courtyard. The guilt offering has to be slaughtered in the north. And its blood, just like the sin offering, has to be sprinkled on the two corners, on the opposite sides, in order that the corners should be, by this way, you'll be getting it on all four sides. By hitting the corner, it'll go on both sides, and by going by the two opposite corners, you'll get it on all four sides of the altar. That's called chelbay, and all its fats. The chelev, remember the portion of fats, yakar mimenu, just like the sin offering, you're going to burn the fats on the altar. However, one difference between, just so you know, one key difference between the sin offering and the guilt offering is that the sin offering, the sacrifice, can be brought from a number of options. Can be brought from, I believe, even ox, depending on who the person is. If it's a more serious crime, it can be brought from sheep and goats, and then we also had a list of birds and so on. Here, the animals that you can bring it from is you cannot bring it as a goat, only a ram or a sheep. And what makes that unique is that the ram and the sheep have a fat tail. The goat doesn't have this fatty tail. So what does that mean? That since they have a fatty tail, when you bring them as a sacrifice, besides the continuous items that have to go on the altar, like we'll learn in a moment, you also have to sacrifice the tail, the fatty tail. There's an extra chunk of really good meat in the ram and the sheep, and that is the fatty tail. The fatty tail has to go on the altar. Okay, that's what we're saying over here. So you got to put the tail on, and also the fats that is on top of the innards. On the inside, you have to put the fats up. That goes there, and as we said in the past, the two kidneys have to be put on the altar, and the fats that's on the kidneys, that's on the flanking, the fats that was on top of on the flanking when the animal would walk, and also the diaphragm have to go a little bit with the liver and the kloyes, and together with the kidneys, you should remove the fats on top of them together, just like we learned by the sin offering. Continuing along, the kohen will go and burn them, these specific pieces, the flanking, the kidneys, the liver, whatever, so on the altar. Ishul Hashem is a fire to Hashem. Asham hu, this is the manner of the way that a asham sacrifice is brought. Okay, so that is what he's saying over here. And Rashi brings down that, there could be some complications here. It's like, what happens if a guy brings the asham and then the guy dies before the sacrifice is brought? What do you do with that sacrifice? Or what happens if a guy brings a sacrifice and he brings two, and you're only allowed to bring one, you're not allowed to bring two, and now there's one extra one? What do you do when you have a surplus of a sacrifice that was brought for a sin, for a specific person, but it's not necessary for whatever reason? Let's say the guy died. So what you have to do is you have to let the animal, you give him to they had like this kind of shepherd who would watch the animals until the animal got a blemish. Why is that good once the animal get a blemish? It's not kosher anymore. Eventually the animal's running and jumping and climbing on places, it'll get a blemish. It won't be a good sacrifice anymore. And at that point, you cannot bring it as a sacrifice because of the blemish. So then you could sell it on the market, get $100, $200 for it, and then that money could be used for another sacrifice for the temple. Until then, it's stuck. You kind of can't do anything with it because it was designated as a sin offering for a specific person, but it can't be bought as a sin offering anymore until it gets a blemish, and you wait for it to get a blemish, and then you can sell it. A blemished animal can be sold and can be bought more sacrifices. What would they do with those extra sacrifices? Rashi tells us it was used for Ketzah Mizbeach, which basically means they never wanted the altar to sit idle. So let's say for some reason there wasn't a lot of sacrifices going on, they would just buy more sacrifices with that extra money that they collected from various places, including the extra asham, and then they would bring sacrifice in the altar, so it would never sat idle. Verse 6, all the male kohanim, again, eat this one too, but makom kadosh, they have to eat in a holy place, only in the courtyard. Kodesh Kadashim Hu, it is holy of holies and has to be chosen as the guilt offering and the sin offering, and I believe are considered the higher level of holiness, shorter amount of time to eat them, and only within the courtyard are they allowed to be eaten. Kachatas, Ka'asham, the sin offering and the guilt offering are very similar to each other. They're very similar laws. Belongs to the Kohen. He's the one in his family that brought it. They own the rights to the meat from that animal. What about the burnt offering? There's no meat there. We said the burnt offering, the first offering which we spoke about today, and we started learning the Chumash, you burn the whole meat. So does the Kohen get any part of the burnt offering meat? Yes, doesn't get the meat. As oilas ish oir ha'oila, he gets the skins. The skins are also worth a lot of money. So all those animals that are brought, you skin the animal, you burn everything on the altar and wherever else outside the camp where it's burnt, but the skin of the animal belongs to the family serving in that temple. So if David, Jarish, or Yehuda were serving that day in the temple, they will get all those skins, which is obviously also worth a good penny. All the meal offerings. What else does the kohen get? Again, he's also on a gluten diet. All the different kinds of oven-baked matzahs and the boiled matzah and the fried matzah. The kohen, besides giving Hashem a scoopful of it, you give all the rest. The kohen gets the oil and the flour and everything that goes together with it. Verse 10, all the minchas that are mixed with oil, and there were most of the offerings had oil to make them look fancy. Besides that scoop that was burnt on the altar, the rest goes to the kohen. There were some sacrifices which we mentioned already, which don't get put on the altar. What are those sacrifices that, they do get put on the altar, but they don't get oil? If it's coming for a very beastly kind of thing, like the woman who they suspected of adultery, you don't put oil in those sacrifices because it was an act of very not nice. So in this also will keep the sacrifice very simple and not make it all fancy. And that is the end, my friend, of today's Chumash. Any quick questions or comments on today's Chumash? Yeah, real quick. Ira, go ahead.
So just to make sure I heard you right, you said regarding koshering using hot water, that's okay?
Koshering boiling hot water. So for example, okay, well, I'm not giving a whole koshering class here, I'm just learning a little bit, but if you want to kosher your metal sink and you boil a pot, you have to do this correctly with a boiling hot water.
I understand that. My question is, if you buy a new pot, do you have to table it or you can just put it in boiling hot water?
No, actually, someone just asked me this today. A new pot, someone bought a new Kiddush cup today. You have to type, you don't need it if it's brand new and nobody uses it. Koshering is for non-kosher to kosher, or from get rid of the taste of the sacrificial meat. The point of toiveling is that whenever the Torah is going to, I think we're going to learn it soon, and maybe next week or 2 weeks, whatever, we're going to learn it, that whenever an item moves from a non-Jew to a Jewish property, it needs to be toiveled in a mikveh. It needs to be submerged in a mikveh. Nothing to do with kosher. They're two totally separate rules.
Gotcha. Thank you.
No problem. You're welcome. If that's the only question, have an amazing day, everyone, and we will see you with Hashem's help tomorrow, same time, same place. Tonight at 7:30, very nice event we're having on Zoom. I'll send out the link to it in a little bit. All the best, guys. Take care.